like to talk about a topic that keeps coming up in my life, and it has to do with my lineage. With I'm Muslim and Iranian, and even though I have been here almost 40 years, a lot of the politics and the religion and all that goes on there is still here. And I think about it, and I have my own philosophy or ideas about it. And this has to do with the concept or form of government that I know many Muslims, whether they're Sunni or Shia or Sufi, they want this form of government. It's very much rooted in our religion, and it's not a fantasy, it's not something that's unattainable. In fact, there is many forms of it already out, and the Muslims are constantly experimenting to get different forms of it out there. And this is a form of democracy which is I would call it Islamic democracy, but the Arabs and the Sufis also use this word. It's called shura, which means shura means like a governing body, but it's not composed of a dictator. You have to you have to get there through either elections or I'll tell you some other forms of shura that also is democratic, and that the Sufis use. I'm familiar with it. The forms of democracy that already exist in Middle East, and they are not something that's unattainable. It's very much possible. For example, in Iran, even though the top leadership is somewhat theocratic, but the lower parliament, the Majlis, is you cannot get into Majlis by having political ties or family ties. You must get elected. People have to vote for you to come in and become a representative there. It's not something for sure. And the only thing that the ruling well, there is another Majlis which is called Majlis Khebregan, which means the elite, mostly composed of religious leaders. But the only thing they would do to regulate the election would be to stop the candidates that are very much extreme to run for election. So they kind of prune the candidates, but there is thousands that apply, and many also get through, but still you have to get elected. You cannot go in there. The government is not something that's for sure that you're going to be there because you are a prince or you are you're such a jolly fellow like Hassan. You have to have popular support, and the government too. The presidency has to be elected, and then the prime minister's office is not. I don't know if I don't think it's elected. It's appointed by the president, so it's a political appointment, but. You cannot just go in. That's a form of democracy. That's a lukewarm. It's not a dictatorship like Saudi Arabia or Kuwait. Uh, then there is a democracy in a form of democracy in Pakistan, and they elect their government until sometimes the Americans come in and they bribe the general, in the last cycle, he comes in and does some stupid things, and then again there's more problems, and then they bring the election back. So there is democracy, and people feel passionate and nationalistic about it. So that's a form of democracy, and other Muslim countries can emulate these two countries. They are both Muslim. One is Shia, one is Sunni, but it's totally or mostly democratic. And there is democracy between Muslims in India, even though India is supposedly a Hindu country. There is 400 million Muslims there. There's more Muslims in Pakistan and in India than is in Pakistan. So if they want their participation in government, they have to get elected to the parliament in India, and they do have a voice. It's a democracy, and well, the Hindus, they don't really like it that much, but hey, they don't. You still have representation. It's not, you're not totally shut off from the political process. Also, in Iraq, the government is, even though it has been very bloody and things haven't gone well, still the Shia government that's ruling Iraq is a form of democracy, and I think the Kurds, they have some form of democracy inside of their own styles, but it's very much tied up with their own ethnicity or nationality, and there goes there. That's a form of democracy. In the other side, I had a friend. He was from Palestine, and Hamas came to power through a democratic process, and it's pretty solid form of democracy. And they also made peace with the PLO, the other faction. That's a pretty good form of government, even though they're under occupation, but the framework for democratic system is there. And then in Egypt, Egyptians are so much like Iranians. I mean, I haven't met one Egyptian that I wasn't fast friend with right away. What the Egyptians would say that I'm Sunni by religion, but I'm Shia in spirit. When I think of Egyptians, I think of them as Shia, but they had a brief period of democracy, and their previous forms of government, Jamal Abdel Nasser, they were pretty representative of their people, and I have every reason to believe the future governments will be a democratic form of government. So that's a form of democracy, and also democratic practices or processes are very much ingrained in the religion of Islam. There is a famous sentence attributed to Prophet Muhammad. He said, "Mushawarahum fil amr," which means he uttered it in one of the wars. It's called the War of Trenches, and in fact, they only found how to defend themselves through, consulting with each other, and it's a pretty ingrained, continuous form of government. There is no reason to believe that this will not take hold in the future. I think the governments that many Arab states like Gulf states or Saudi Arabia or Kuwait, they are more an anomaly than previous forms of government or governments that exist outside in more regular Muslim countries that are not very oil rich, like Pakistan or Iran. They are the monarchies. I think that there is a reason to believe that these monarchies will give way to constitutional government or some form of democracy in the future when the oil money runs out, and running a dictatorship is a lot more expensive than running democracy, because dictatorship you must have a very good secret police, and pay off opponents and pay off the poor so they'll shut up and don't cause problems, and do this and that, and also have to kill some of the opponents every once in a while to let people know that you're in charge, like the Saudis did and killed the Shia clergy. But that was very sad. But there is reason to believe that this situation will give way to different form of government, and as a Muslim, you should welcome changes. You should look with a smile, because basically when democratic governments take over, you are or I am practicing my religion. I'm practicing being a Muslim, and the religion of Islam discourages concentration of political power, concentration of wealth or money. All the laws encourage people to help each other achieve economic participation and also political participation. And there is nothing in the early Islamic history or later on that would suggest that we should keep these stupid monarchies. And many of these monarchies, because they're unable to deal with their internal conflicts that their form of government generates this kind of conflict, they try to focus attention into a foreign country like Yemen or Iran. I don't know why we Iranians are such bad guys. It's very strange. When I have met wealthy Saudis or royal Saudis, or just regular people, and as soon as I meet them, they are fast friends. They're just they recognize Muslim, and exactly like meeting your neighbor. And then when you are not there, the government or the elite, they portray an image of Iranians or or other sects like Sufis as if they are like some kind of pervert, believing in Shia Islam is Islam. You don't have to believe in all the trash the Wahhabis have generated. Well, on the subject of Wahhabism, and I believe Wahhabism is a form of bid'ah, like a new kind of creation that enhances or is a form of ideology or based on religion for the ruling elite in Riyadh or wherever. If you study the stuff they do or their practices of being extreme violence and supporting terrorism, you don't see any parallel with the Islamic history. The religion of Islam does not promote any of this stuff that these people do. I mean, I'm just gonna tell you one example, and there is many examples of this. Prophet Muhammad, when he was in Medina, there were some minority of Muslims. They were not the majority, and they lived with other religions, with Jews, with Christians, with Munafiqin, is the people who just didn't like Muslims at all, peacefully for many years. And the religion of Islam grew more in peacetime than in wartime. And the wars that were there were for self-preservation, not for conquering or I don't know. I don't agree with the stuff this sect or Wahhabism are doing. It would be a good idea for many clergy in Shia, Sunni, or Sufi clergy to get together and sit down and study these people and see, hey, are these people really Muslim, or this philosophy that they have put together, does it really agree with the religion of Islam? Are they really a form of a Shia of this religion? Did they, or have they broken apart? Have they gone their own way? Because these ideas they have is very alien. Another objection to the religion that the Wahhabis have created is that when Prophet Muhammad was giving his last sermon in Hajj al-Wada, is the last pilgrimage, he said that I'm leaving you with two very valuable inheritance. He used the word saglain, which means like the two very heavy piece of gold or treasure. It has a lot of sagla, it has a lot of weight on it. One of them, he said, is the Quran, the book itself, and the other one, he said, is the etrat, or my family, like Imam Ali, his daughter Fatima, and his grandchildren, and there is a lot of historical religious documents and narratives and hadiths that shows, hey, you need to be mindful of what the family says. In fact, it's not just the book or the letter of the law. The letter of the law is subject to interpretation of the owner of the letter of the law, which is the family. There is, in fact, recommendations, many in the last days of his life. But I guess the Muslims, they are very much inclined to use the Quran out of context because it helps them abuse power and do whatever they want. In fact, many of these practices by the Bahraini government or Kuwaiti government and Saudi government are not Muslim altogether. They are crap. And also another objection that I have is that having a democratic form of government is not a fantasy. In fact, there is already existing democratic governments, and it's not an impossible or totally violent way of to get there. When there is a monarchy, there is always conflict and wars, and these people, sometimes they screw up, and they, like Saddam Hussein, screwed up and went to war, attracted foreigners and brought ruin to Iraq, and then the foreigners, they don't want to govern Iraq and say, hey, we're just gonna let some elections take hold. I mean, that's a stupid way for a democracy to come in, but it doesn't have to, and it's not an impossible dream. Anyhow, thank you for your participation. My call is taking over, so we'll go over this in another section. Thanks.